The emergency signal cut through space like a knife through butter. It was so desperate that even the nastiest space pirates stopped what they were doing just to listen. Ambassador Veltheri, one of those fancy aliens from the Galactic Harmony, Council who loved giving long speeches about proper war manners, was crying into his communicator like a lost child. His voice was shaking so badly, you could hear it through the universal translator. Please, humans, we need your help. We know we said terrible things about you. We called you savage fighters and said you were too violent for our civilized galaxy. We even made laws to keep your weapons away from us. The alien was practically begging now, but something awful has happened. The Next Vari Collective has stolen our children, not just a few, but all of them. Every single young one from 17 different planets. They're holding them prisoner on their giant fortress moon, and they want us to give up completely in 3 days, or they'll hurt them. Now here's where it gets really funny. Just 3 hours before this desperate call for help, these exact same council members had been sitting in their fancy meeting room, writing up new rules to stop humans from being so dangerous. They were literally planning to make humans even weaker, while their own children were being kidnapped. The timing was so perfect that gambling houses across the galaxy started taking bets on whether humans had planned the whole thing just to prove a point. Captain Ali Junho was on his warship called the Scorched Earth, drinking his morning coffee and reading the daily reports. When that emergency message came through his speakers, he took such a big gulp that he nearly choked on the hot liquid. Then he started laughing. Not just a little chuckle, but the kind of deep belly laugh that goes on for minutes. His second-in-command, Officer Kim Tae-young, thought his captain was having some kind of mental breakdown. "Sir, are you okay?" Tae-young asked, looking worried. Lee Junho wiped tears from his eyes and kept laughing. "Tae-young, do you remember last month when the council sent us that official letter saying we were too aggressive? And the month before? When they said our fighting style was embarrassing to the galaxy? In every single month for the past 20 years, when they've been telling us we're too violent and need to calm down?" "Sir, I remember." "Well, guess who just called asking for help from the big scary monsters they've been complaining about?" Irony was so thick you could cut it with a laser sword. For 2 decades, the Council had been treating humans like dangerous animals that needed to be kept in cages. They made rules about what weapons humans could use, what ships they could build, and even where they were allowed to travel. They acted like humans were the biggest threat to peace in the galaxy. But here's what made it even funnier. Collective thought they were smart. They had spent years studying how humans fight, reading all the official military reports, and watching recordings of human battles. They knew exactly what the human fleet looked like, what weapons they used, and how they operated. At least, they thought they did. What the Nexvari didn't know was that those official reports were like watching a tiger with its claws cut off. The Council had been so worried about human military power that they had demanded to see everything. So humans showed them everything they were allowed to see. The clean, polite, rule-following version of human warfare. But in the dark corners of human space, in secret shipyards that didn't appear on any official maps, humanity had been building other things. Ships with names that would make angels weep, and demons hide. Weapons that existed only in theory, because using them in practice would probably end civilizations. The kind of military hardware that made regular warships look like children's toys. The Nexvari had studied the human military like students preparing for a test. But they had only been given half the textbook they knew about the ships with. Nice clean names like peacekeeping vessel and diplomatic escort. They had no idea about the ships with names like theoretical deterrent and diplomatic impossibility. Captain Lee Junho was still chuckling as he opened a communication channel to the other human ships in the area. "Attention all vessels. Did everyone else just hear that pathetic crying from the Council?" "Loud and clear, Captain," came the reply. "From Captain Park Jiwon, on the nearby ship called Last Resort." I almost felt sorry for them, almost. "Should we help them?" asked Captain Choi Sung-yin from the ship named Overkill. Lee Junho's smile got wider. "Oh, we're definitely going to help them. Not the way they think we will. Send word to the fleet, tell them it's time to show the galaxy what we keep in the really dark hangars." Within minutes, secret messages were flying through human space. Ships that officially didn't exist started powering up their engines. Crews that were supposed to be on vacation suddenly found themselves called back to duty. And in the deepest, darkest parts of human military bases, things that weren't supposed to exist began preparing for war. The next we're about to learn the difference between fighting the humans the Council knew about and fighting the humans that lived in the shadows. The emergency meeting of the Galactic Council was like watching a comedy show, except nobody was laughing. The Grand Chamber, which usually echoed with proud speeches about peace and civilization, was now filled with the sound of alien species having complete meltdowns. Representatives who had spent their entire careers making humans look like violent barbarians were now desperately trying to ask those same barbarians for help without losing face. Council Prime Vickler was having the worst day of his very long life. His tentacles, which normally stayed a dignified blue-green color, were flashing through every color imaginable. In his species, this was like having your emotions written on a billboard for everyone to see. Right now, those colors were screaming pure embarrassment and panic. We need to discuss. He started, then stopped, his tentacles turning an even brighter shade of humiliation. Perhaps our previous statements about human military practices were not entirely accurate. The human ambassador Kim Minho was sitting in his chair like he didn't have a care in the world, had that kind of calm, peaceful smile that made other diplomats nervous, like he knew a secret joke that nobody else understood. And honestly, he kind of did. "Oh, please don't stop now, Prime Vickler," Kim Minho said in the sweetest voice possible. "I was really enjoying your speech from yesterday. You know, the one where you said our complete lack of respect for proper warfare was going to destroy galactic civilization. Would you like me to play it back for everyone?" The council chamber went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Pins existed in space. That's when the council's AI assistant, trying to be helpful, started playing recordings from their previous meetings. The voice of Delegate Zorthok from the Zenthari Empire filled the room. "Humans are nothing but savage beasts who fight like cornered animals. They have no understanding of honorable combat or civilized warfare. They are a stain on our peaceful galaxy." Delegate Zorthok tried to sink so low in his chair that he practically became part of the furniture. His face turned 3 different shades of purple, which in his species meant he wanted to disappear forever. But the AI wasn't done. It kept playing more clips. "Human military tactics are barbaric and unsuitable for civilized species. Their weapons are unnecessarily destructive. They fight wars like they're trying to end entire civilizations." Each quote made the silence in the room heavier. Kim Minho just kept smiling that same peaceful smile, like he was listening to his favorite music. "Fascinating," he said finally. "It almost sounds like you were describing exactly the kind of people you'd want to call when someone kidnaps your children and threatens to hurt them unless you surrender everything you've ever worked for." While this embarrassing show was happening, in the council chamber, something much more interesting was happening in deep space. The long-range sensors that monitored all space traffic were picking up strange readings. Ships were moving in the darkness between stars, but these weren't the kind of ships anyone had seen before. The Council's military advisors were staring at their screens like they were looking at ghosts. Chief Advisor Melkron was frantically adjusting his instruments, convinced they were broken. "These readings can't be right," he muttered to his assistant. "These energy signatures are impossible. No ship should be able to generate this much power without collapsing into a black hole." His assistant, a young Valdorian named Kickstel, was equally confused. "Sir, should we report these as sensor malfunctions?" "I don't know," Melkaran admitted. "But if these readings are real, then humanity has been hiding military technology that makes our best warships look like toys. The ships dropping out of hyperspace around the galaxy had names that didn't appear in any official human fleet registry. These weren't the clean, diplomatic names like Peaceful Endeavor or Harmony Seeker that the Council was used to seeing. These ships had names that made experienced military officers break out in cold sweats. The first ship to reveal itself was called Humanity's Regret. The second was Diplomatic Option Zero. The third had a name that made the Universal Translators struggle, the Counselor's Nightmare. Even the Nexvari, who were monitoring all galactic communications from their fortress moon, started feeling nervous. They had planned this whole operation based on their understanding of human military capabilities. They knew exactly how many ships humans had, what weapons they carried, and how they preferred to fight. But these new ships didn't match anything in their intelligence files. The energy readings were all wrong. The weapon signatures were completely unknown. It was like watching a completely different species emerge from the shadows. War Prime, Gilthok, of the next ferry was studying the sensor data with growing concern. "These cannot be human vessels," he told his intelligence officer. "Humans do not possess technology of this level." "Sir," his officer replied nervously, "the transponder codes confirm they are human ships. But you're right, they don't match any known human vessel class." Back in the council chamber, Kim Minho was still enjoying the show. He said conversationally. "It's funny how perspective changes everything. Yesterday you were worried about our military being too dangerous. Today, you're hoping it's dangerous enough?" Prime Veclor's tentacles had settled into a steady pattern of deep purple, which meant he was thinking very hard about something he didn't want to think about. "Ambassador Kim, we may have underestimated the complexity of human military organization." "Oh, I think you estimated it perfectly," Kim Minho replied with that same calm smile. "You estimated exactly what we wanted you to estimate. The question now is whether what you didn't estimate will be enough to save your children." The terrifying truth was starting to dawn on everyone in that chamber. For decades, they had been regulating and restricting what they thought was the full extent of human military power. But what if that was just the tip of the iceberg? What if everything they knew about human capabilities was just what humans had allowed them to see? The ships gathering in the darkness of space were about to answer that question, and the galaxy would never be the same. The ships that came out of the darkness weren't like anything the galaxy had ever seen before. They didn't appear on any official list of human vessels, didn't follow any known design patterns, and definitely didn't look like they cared about the Council's rules for civilized warfare. These ships looked like they had been through hell, and decided to make hell their home. When they dropped out of hyperspace, space itself seemed to shiver around them. Their hulls were covered in scars and burn marks that told stories no sane person would want to hear. Some of those scars came from weapons testing that had turned entire moons into space dust. Others came from battles that officially never happened, places that didn't exist on any star charts. Captain Lee Junho's ship, the Scorched Earth, had always been considered one of the more aggressive vessels in the human fleet. Its weapons could level cities, and its crew had a reputation for solving problems with overwhelming firepower. But compared to what was arriving now, the Scorched Earth looked like a luxury cruise ship. The first of the ghost ships to fully materialize was called the Xenocide's Edge. When it dropped out of hyperspace, it was dragging something behind it that looked like a small asteroid field. The rocks tumbled through space in a neat line, glinting in the light of nearby stars. It was almost pretty until the sensors got a closer look. Those weren't asteroids. They were the twisted remains of warships, crushed and melted together into unrecognizable chunks of metal. The debris field stretched for thousands of kilometers, and every piece told the same story. Something had made the captain of the Xenocide's Edge very, very angry, and that something no longer existed. Lieutenant Commander Yoon Seojin, monitoring the sensors from his position on a nearby scout ship, felt his blood run cold. "Sir," he called to his captain, "I'm reading approximately 200 destroyed vessels in that debris field. The metal composition suggests they were from at least 12 different species." "What happened to them?" his captain asked. "Based on the damage patterns, they were all destroyed by a single ship, sir. The Xenocide's Edge." Then came the communication that made even hardened space marines reach for their lucky charms. Watch a voice cut through all the military channels, calm and cheerful like someone calling to chat about the weather. It belonged to Admiral Park Soyoung, and she sounded absolutely delighted to be there. "Hello there, Council Prime Veclor," she said with a kind of friendliness that made smart people very nervous. "I heard you called for pest control services. Well, you're in luck because my fleet specializes in permanent solutions to diplomatic problems. We're very thorough, and we guarantee our work." The way she said permanent solutions made it clear that she wasn't talking about negotiating treaties or signing peace agreements. She was talking about making problems disappear so completely that future generations would have trouble believing they ever existed in the first place. Back on their fortress moon, the Nexvari were having their own crisis meeting. War Prime Gulthok was staring at sensor readings that made no sense whatsoever. According to their intelligence reports, which had cost them millions of credits and several very good spies, the human navy consisted of roughly 1,000 ships of various sizes. What was currently surrounding their position was over 3,000 vessels, and every single one of them was broadcasting energy signatures that made the Nexvari's own dreadnoughts look like children's toys. "This is impossible," Gulthok muttered, reading the reports again. "Our intelligence is perfect. We know everything about human military capabilities." His intelligence chief, a nervous creature named Vexkali, was practically vibrating with anxiety. "Sir, perhaps our intelligence was ... incomplete." "Incomplete," Gueltho roared. "We've been studying humans for 50 years. We know the name of every ship, the specifications of every weapon, the location of every base. Apparently," Vexkali said quietly, "we knew what they wanted us to know." But the real terror began when the humans started talking to each other over open channels. They weren't trying to hide their conversations, which somehow made it worse. It was like they didn't care who was listening because they were so confident in their abilities that secrecy was pointless. "Hey, Captain Jung Hoziok," on the diplomatic crisis, came a cheerful voice over the com. "You still carrying those planet cracker missiles from the Proxima trials?" "Nah, switched those out last month," came the reply. "Got the new stellar disruptors. Instead, way more efficient, and the explosion colors are really pretty." The council representatives who saw the test footage said it was like watching a rainbow. Right before they all started crying, another voice joined the conversation. "Speaking of pretty explosions, anyone know if we'll need the antimatter torpedoes for this job? Or should we just stick with the regular galaxy-ending stuff?" "Depends on how stubborn they are," laughed another captain. "If they surrender quickly, we can probably just use the reality-warping cannons. Save the really fun weapons for next time." The Nexvari, listening to these casual conversations, felt their confidence crumbling with every word. These humans were discussing weapons that could destroy stars like they were talking about choosing what to have for lunch, and they sounded happy about it. War Prime Gulthok was no longer looking at sensor readings. He was staring at the communication transcripts, trying to understand what he was reading. Did that human just say reality-warping cannons like it was a normal thing to have?" "Yes, sir," Vexkali replied, his voice barely a whisper. "And the one called galaxy-ending stuff was mentioned as their backup option. What kind of species builds weapons that can end entire galaxies and then calls them stuff?" "The kind that's been lying to us about their military capabilities for 50 years, sir." The truth was becoming horribly clear. The humans hadn't been hiding their true strength out of fear or shame. They'd been hiding it out of politeness. All those years of accepting restrictions and limitations, all those times they'd agreed to tone down their military presence, all those diplomatic smiles when the council criticized their methods, it had all been an act. The humans had been playing along with the council's rules because they found it amusing, not because they had to. And now that the game was over, the galaxy was about to see what happened when humanity stopped pretending. To be civilized, the fortress moon of Kethver had been considered impregnable. A natural satellite converted into a military installation, its surface bristling with weapons that could crack continents and shields that had withstood combined fleets of 6 star systems. For 300 years, it had served as the ultimate threat in the Nexvari arsenal. Even the Galactic Council had never dared to challenge it directly, but the human fleet didn't take attack formations. They didn't demand surrender or broadcast ultimatums. They simply arrived, like a cosmic force of nature, and began what their tactical communications referred to as aggressive landscaping. The humans had come in silence, their ships materializing from hyperspace with the casual confidence of predators who had never known fear. Their vessels were scarred and battle-worn, bearing names that made seasoned warriors uncomfortable. Each ship carried markings that told stories of conflicts across a dozen star systems. Victories that had become legends whispered in the dark corners of military bars throughout the galaxy. Captain Lee opened a channel with the tone of someone calling in a noise complaint. Next for a command. This is the Human Diplomatic Corps. We're here about the missing children. We have 30 seconds to begin evacuation procedures before we demonstrate why the Council usually asks us to stay home. Casual nature of the threat sent ripples of unease through the Fortress Command Center. War Prime Dekalel, a veteran of 17 major campaigns, found himself gripping his command throne with claws that had never trembled in battle. He had studied human tactics extensively, pored over battle reports, and analyzed their psychological warfare techniques. He thought he understood their patterns. You cannot assault this installation without destroying the hostages. Your own moral constraints, the Kalel began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been challenged. Oh, that's adorable, Captain Lee interrupted, the amusement in her voice somehow more terrifying than any roar of rage. You think we're constrained by morality? Did you miss the part where our ships are named War Crime Incarnate in Geneva Suggestion? We're not here to rescue the children. The War Prime felt his certainty cracking like ice under pressure. Around him, his tactical officers exchanged nervous glances. The humans' reputation for protecting their young was legendary throughout the galaxy. Every species knew the stories of human parents who had torn through armies to save a single child. If they weren't here for rescue, then what? Then why? He started to ask, but his words died in his throat. We're here to make sure that in 1,000 years, when some species considers taking hostages, they'll remember what happened to the last ones who tried it. The statement hung in the void like a death sentence. Around the fortress, space itself began to change. The humans began their demonstration, not targeting the fortress, but the empty space around it, weapons that turned vacuum into something that screamed. Reality warping technologies that made the local star briefly forget how to shine. First weapon discharged with no sound, no flash, no dramatic display. One moment there was empty space, the next there was something that hurt to look at. The fabric of reality twisted and folded, creating geometric impossibilities that made the fortress sensor scream warnings in languages that hadn't been invented yet. The phenomenon lasted only seconds, but when it faded, a section of space, the size of a small moon, simply wasn't there anymore. It's not destroyed, not vaporized, just absent, as if it had never existed. What in the name of the first darkness was that? Whispered Dekalel, second in command, a grizzled veteran who had seen the worst the galaxy could offer. The humans weren't finished. Their second demonstration involved something they called a temporal inversion cascade. Time itself began, moving backward in a small region of space, creating a bubble where effect preceded cause. Ships that had been destroyed in battles centuries ago flickered back into existence for brief moments before dissolving again. The local star aged backward, growing brighter and younger before snapping back to its normal state with a pulse of energy that made the fortress shields flicker. Impossible, breathed the War Prime. The energy requirements alone were just getting warmed up, came Captain Lee's voice over the communication channel. That was a Class 7 reality restructure. We've got Class 12 weapons in our arsenal, but honestly, we're trying to keep the local star system intact. We wouldn't want the neighbors to complain about the property values dropping. The third demonstration made the fortress crew question their understanding of physics. A human ship fired something that looked like ordinary energy at a distant asteroid. The asteroid didn't explode or vaporize. Instead, it began to exist in multiple states simultaneously, becoming solid, liquid, gas, and pure energy all at the same time while remaining perfectly intact. The visual effect was nauseating, like watching reality have a nervous breakdown. The mathematics of that should be impossible, muttered the fortress's chief scientist, his tentacles writhing in distress. They're violating at least 14 fundamental laws of physics. Laws are more like suggestions when you have enough firepower. Came another human voice over the channel, this one belonging to someone who sounded like they were eating lunch. While operating weapons that could unmake solar systems, the next had built their reputation on being the most feared warriors in the galaxy. They had conquered systems, enslaved species, and held the Galactic Council at bay through sheer military might. But watching the humans casually demonstrate technologies that made their most advanced weapons look like stone knives, the Clell realized they weren't dealing with another military force. They were dealing with something that treated the impossible as routine. "How long have you had these weapons?" he found himself asking, his military training warring with a growing sense of cosmic horror. "Oh, these. About 200 years, give or take. But we've been working on some new designs. Would you like to see the prototype for our Galaxy-class reality editor? Fair warning, the last time we tested it, we accidentally created a parallel universe where mathematics work differently. The locals there are still pretty upset about it. Around the fortress, more impossible things began happening. Empty space caught fire and burned with colors that had no names. Gravity reversed itself in localized pockets, creating floating islands of twisted metal from destroyed ships that had been pulled from their graves in distant battlefields. Time moved in spirals, creating brief glimpses of possible futures where the fortress existed in various states of destruction. The human fleet hadn't fired a single shot at the fortress itself. They were simply demonstrating their power in the surrounding space, turning the vacuum into a canvas for displays of force that redefined what was possible. Each demonstration was more impossible than the last, each one delivered with the casual confidence of beings who had grown so far beyond conventional warfare that they treated reality itself as just another weapon in their arsenal. "Your children are safe, by the way," Captain Lee mentioned almost as an afterthought. "We extracted them about 10 minutes ago using quantum teleportation. They're currently enjoying ice cream aboard our medical ship while our counselors help them process the trauma. We'll be dropping them off with their families once we finish our object lesson here." The Clell's blood turned to ice. If the children were already safe, if the humans had already achieved their primary objective, then everything happening now was purely for the purpose of sending a message written in physics-defying weapons and impossible technologies that would echo through the galaxy for generations. "The question now," Captain Lee continued, her voice taking on the tone of a teacher explaining a simple concept to a slow student, "is whether you'd like to surrender now and spend the rest of your lives in comfortable imprisonment, or whether you'd prefer we demonstrate what happens when we actually try to hurt something." The War Prime looked around his command center at faces filled with terror and awe. His officers, warriors who had never known fear, were staring at their screens in shock. Some were weeping. Others were praying to gods they had forgotten they believed in. The humans had broken something fundamental in their understanding of what was possible, and the fragments of their worldview were still falling. "We surrender," he whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Excellent choice," came the cheerful reply. "Please prepare for boarding. Our diplomatic team will be with you shortly to discuss terms. And don't worry about the space-time distortions. They'll fade in a few hours, probably." As the impossible phenomena slowly faded from the space around Kethver, the fortress that had once been considered impregnable sat silent and humbled. The humans had achieved total victory without firing a single hostile shot, using demonstration alone to shatter the will of the most feared military installation in the galaxy. The message was clear. It would spread to every corner of known space. Humanity's children were off limits. The consequences of violating that rule were beyond imagination. The end came not with battle, but with a choice that would haunt the galaxy for generations. The human fleet surrounded the fortress moon in a perfect sphere, each ship maintaining position with Swiss watch precision and loaded gun menace. 300 vessels formed an unbreakable wall of metal and malice, their weapons tracking every movement on the fortress surface with the patience of professional hunters. The formation was beautiful in its deadly perfection, like a work of art designed by someone who understood both geometry and violence. Inside the fortress, War Prime the Clell watched his tactical displays with growing horror. The humans hadn't just arrived with overwhelming force. They had arrived with mathematical precision that spoke of planning that went far beyond simple military strategy. Every ship was positioned to maximize both firepower and psychological impact. The formation created shadows on the fortress surface that looked suspiciously like skull patterns when viewed from the command center. The next very faced an ultimatum, delivered in the cheerful tone of someone ordering coffee. Admiral Park's voice carried across all communication channels with the kind of friendly warmth that made seasoned warriors check their weapons twice. War Prime, you have two options. Option 1. Release the children immediately. Surrender unconditionally. And we'll make your deaths quick. Option 2. You don't. And we activate the vengeance protocol. The casual way she mentioned making their deaths quick sent ripples of unease through the fortress command staff. These were beings who had built their reputation on being the most feared military force in the galaxy. And here was a human discussing their execution like weekend plans. The War Prime made the mistake that would define the final chapter of Nexvari. History, he asked. What is the vengeance protocol? The silence that followed stretched for exactly 37 seconds, long enough for every being in the fortress to contemplate their mortality, short enough to maintain dramatic tension. When Admiral Park finally answered, her voice carried a smile that made nearby stars dim with sympathetic dread. The vengeance protocol is what happens when you hurt our friends' children. We don't just kill you. We don't just destroy your species. We make sure the concept of your existence becomes a cautionary tale told to scare children across the galaxy. Around the fortress, the human ships began to change. Weapon ports that had been hidden behind innocent-looking hull plating slid open with mechanical precision. Energy readings spiked to levels that made the fortress sensors scream warnings in 17 different languages. But more unsettling than the visible preparations were the things that couldn't be detected, the subtle distortions in space-time that suggested weapons beyond conventional understanding, you see. Admiral Park continued, her tone remaining conversational, despite discussing genocide. Humans have a very specific response to threats against children. We don't get angry. Anger is temporary. Anger fades. Get methodical. Get creative. Get thorough in ways that make extinction look like mercy. The tactical officer beside the Kella was frantically running calculations on his console, his tentacles moving in patterns that spoke of barely controlled panic. War Prime, he whispered. Their energy output readings are ... They're impossible. According to our sensors, some of those ships are drawing power directly from stellar cores. Others appear to be tapping into dimensional rifts. This isn't military technology, this is applied cosmology. The humans began broadcasting a countdown, synchronized across all ships, and with each number, space itself seemed to hold its breath. The countdown wasn't just audible, it was visible. It's projected in letters of fire across the vacuum. It's written in languages that ranged from ancient Nexvari script to mathematical equations that hurt to look at ... 10 ... The fortress shields flickered. Not from any external attack, but from the sheer weight of potential energy surrounding them. The humans were charging weapons that redefined what was possible, systems that drew power from the fundamental forces that held reality together. ... 9 ... Emergency klaxons began sounding throughout the fortress. Not battle alarms these were. The warnings reserved for cosmic disasters. Now, the sounds that played when stars died or black holes opened too close to inhabited worlds. The fortress's automated systems had detected something so dangerous they had no category for it. ... 8 ... War Prime Nekalal found himself thinking about his offspring, safe in the Nexvari home system. He thought about the schools they attended, the games they played, the future they would never have if he chose wrong in the next few seconds. For the first time in his military career, he understood why humans fought with such terrifying intensity when their children were threatened. 7 ... The children were released, not through negotiation or careful prisoner exchange, but in a panicked rush that saw Nexvari guards literally throwing their captives toward the nearest airlocks. The fortress's own teleportation systems, normally reserved for emergency evacuation, of command staff were hastily reprogrammed to beam the human children directly to the nearest human vessel. 6 ... The Nexvari surrendered. The transmission came from 17 different sources simultaneously: the War Prime, his command staff, section leaders throughout the fortress, even maintenance crews who had jury-rigged communication devices to broadcast their individual surrenders. No one wanted to be responsible for what happened if the countdown reached 0. 5. The humans stopped counting. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the countdown had been. For long moments, the only sound was the hum of weapon systems slowly powering down, like the breathing of some vast predator deciding whether to show mercy. "Wise choice," Admiral Park finally said, and the relief in her voice suggested that even she hadn't been entirely sure what would happen if they reached 0. "Surrender accepted. Prepare for boarding and occupation." The real twist came when the rescued children were returned to their families aboard the Council diplomatic vessel. The operation was handled with the same meticulous care the humans showed. In everything, medical teams standing by, counselors ready to help process trauma, even entertainment specialists who had prepared games and activities to help the children readjust. But it was the smallest human child who provided the moment that would be remembered by every being present. 6-year-old Choi Min-soo, Ambassador Kim's son, was overheard talking to his young council friends as they played in the diplomatic vessel's common area. "My daddy's friends are really nice," he said, arranging toy ships in patterns that unconsciously mimicked the human fleet formation. "They gave me candy and let me name one of their ships. I called it Friendship is Magic because it had pretty lights." The council members listening felt a collective chill run down their spines. If humans named a planet-killing dreadnought after a child's whim, they let 6-year-olds choose designations for weapons of mass destruction, what did they call the ships they actually took seriously? The answer, according to intercepted communications between human fleet commanders, was discovered later that day. The flagship of the human fleet, the vessel that had served as command center for the entire operation, the ship that carried enough firepower to sterilize solar systems, was listed in official records with the designation Tuesday. Not Tuesday's Revenge or Tuesday's Wrath, just Tuesday. As if ending entire civilizations was something humans scheduled between lunch and afternoon meetings, the Nexaveri Collective was disbanded within a standard galactic month. Their territories were occupied not by conquerors, but by human peacekeeping forces who built schools and hospitals with the same casual efficiency they'd shown in warfare. Former Nexaveri worlds found themselves with better infrastructure, improved medical care, and educational systems that actually taught critical thinking instead of military doctrine. The humans administered their new territories with the same methodical thoroughness they brought to everything else. War criminals were tried in courts that observed due process. Civilians were relocated to better housing, even. Former soldiers were offered retraining programs and integration into peaceful society. It was conquest wrapped in social work, invasion. Disguised as humanitarian aid, the galaxy learned there are fates worse than death. Being remembered as the species that made humanity's children cry, the Nexvari became a cautionary tale told in hushed whispers across 1,000 worlds. Children of a dozen species would be warned to behave, or the humans might get angry like they did with the Nexvari. The Galactic Council never passed another resolution limiting human military capabilities. They were too busy trying to forget what they'd seen in those 30 seconds between 10 and 5. Wondering what humanity kept in reserve for enemies who didn't surrender at 6. The official records were sealed, the footage classified. But the knowledge remained humanity had weapons that made extinction look merciful, and they were willing to use them to protect children who weren't even their own species. In the end, the Vengeance Protocol was never actually activated, but its shadow fell across the galaxy, a reminder that some lines should never be crossed, and that humanity's capacity for both compassion and destruction existed in perfect, terrifying balance.